didn't like school, and then what happened next?
The Taliban were ousted in 2001, but then they would become like grouped as an insurgency, and around 2005 and 6 they made a strong comeback. And now reading back history, I learned that they actually created this thing called education ministry, which really was about disrupting education and like threatening schools, threatening families and teachers for girls to not go to school. And so something like that happened to us too. Like a group of men came to our door and threatened us if we continued to go into school. And so we stopped going to school.
What would happen? They said if you continue to go into school, what would
Yeah,
happen?
yeah. So at that time, there was like girls being like the acid thrown on their face, or like a family
A face scarred for life by fanatics. Just 17 years old, Shamsia's crime? She was walking to school, a girls' school in Kandahar. Doctors have managed to save her eyesight, but she was still too shocked and in too much pain to talk to us. It appears the Taliban squads are roaming freely here. On the back of their motorcycles, they're indistinguishable from anybody else. Sometimes they're rogues disguised bombs, sometimes Kalashnikovs. This time, they were carrying acid. The girls' school was empty of pupils when we reached it. They were too afraid to say, their teachers told me. Education for girls has been one of the biggest achievements for society here since the Taliban was ousted. The abandoned classrooms, testament to the success of the latest tactics.
Teachers getting killed, or like the schools. So those were the threats. But for us specifically, it was like acid thrown in our faces if we continued.
Hey everybody, welcome back to another exciting episode of the Relentless Goal Achievers podcast. I'm your host, Eric Konovalov, and I got an amazing guest for you guys today. Listen, we're talking about achieving our goals, what it takes to get to where we want to be in life. And I could not think of a better person to share her journey with you today. So listen, buckle up. This one is going to be amazing because my guest is Sola Mahfouz. She's the author of her new book, Defiant Dreams. It's about the journey of an Afghan girl who risked everything for education. I mean, I got two kids who hate going to school, and here we're going to hear about a girl who risked everything, her whole life, just to get education. It's a journey about her being forced to cease her education at the age of 11 in Afghanistan to her eventual rise as a quantum information researcher at Tufts University. Sola's story is powerful, and I'm so excited to have her share it today with all of you guys. Sola, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's a pleasure. So where do you live now?
So I live in Boston, Massachusetts.
Okay. And we're just over, the Boston Marathons. I'm sure that was exciting in your city.
Yeah.
Yeah. Sola, so take me back. I mean, obviously you're from Afghanistan. Me, I don't know if you know this, as a veteran, I found myself in late 2001, spending a few nights at the wonderful Kandahar airport.
Oh, sorry.
So I've been to Afghanistan. I've actually been to a few places in Afghanistan, and I would love to hear your story. So age 11, what was your life like before that?
Yeah, so I was born in 1996. That was the first time Taliban were in power, and I was young, so I was just born, and then shielded by the innocence of childhood, like I was protected from the darkness that was reigning outside. And so then too, like women were not allowed to go to school, no work. My mother, before the Taliban and the civil war, was professor at Kabul University, and that everything just ended. And so then 2001, the U.S.
For those of us who don't really know the history of Afghanistan, Sola, in 1996, it was under Taliban rule already, right?
For the first
So,
time.
so you're born into this.
Mhm.
Now, your mom wasn't born into it. She saw the takeover of the government, but you were born into, like, girls aren't going to school. Everybody's covered head to toe. Islamic Jihad pretty much ruling the place.
So for me, like my time is just this time, and then the U.S. and its ally comes, and Taliban are ousted, and suddenly there feels like this whole world opens up, and we were, could watch TV. So it like, I know this, like, of course I was too young to understand the complexity of the situation back then too, but I remember like this around 2001, 2000, this like colorful time. um
Where were you? Oh my gosh, what a it's so interesting for you to hear you say that. My goodness. I'm going to come back to that statement in a second, the colorful time statement. But did you live in a big city? Like, where did you live in Afghanistan?
I was born in Kandahar and I lived there.
You
um
were born in Kandahar and you lived there. I've been to your city.
yeah,
My
yeah.
goodness, I got chills. Wow. Okay. Um, you were born in Kandahar and you lived in Kandahar, and you just said from 2001 till when was it a colorful time?
I mean, of course, memory, I think memory tricks us too. So I was young, and I remember like my father being, we could suddenly watch TV, and the first thing, and there was this, look, before, like my sister would like turn on like the radio music or something, then every, like all the windows need to be shut, and nobody's like, don't talk about this. So there was so much fear in in the Taliban time. You couldn't like take photographs. So there's like every small thing that gave life joy was forbidden. And of course, as a young person, I understood the fear of everything. Like, oh, if there was something said in the house, like, don't say this outside. And so there's so much. And said in 2001, like those things lifted, and no
What
longer.
kind of things would you guys say in the house that you couldn't say outside?
I mean, the thing, for example, my sister loved photography, and so she loved taking our pictures. And then whenever someone would go to Pakistan or something, then they would print it and come bring it back. And like we couldn't say that oh, we have photographs in our house, because the Taliban would raid houses and like burn those things, and photography was forbidden. And so, for example, my sister also is young, girl, and she was teenager at that time. She would love to listen to Bollywood music or something that she listened in Pakistan, and then she would bring cassettes with herself, and so she couldn't just like turn on the radio or like the tape that she had. And so like those small things. Or for example, myself, I was born in 1996, so like dolls were forbidden in Kandahar. There was no doll that you can buy. And my mother bought one time when my mother was visiting her sister in Pakistan, and one of her sister was visiting from Canada, and so she brought us this dolls, and my mother smuggled it from Pakistan to Kandahar. And even though like I had this beautiful doll, but I couldn't just like play it with my friends, because then they could tell it to other people. And so it has to be like sit inside the room, and then can only play it at the times when I know it was safe. So I think those small things that were just it felt like, oh, we are doing something so big that the outside world doesn't have to know about it. So I think just being able to do those small things after the Taliban were ousted, it felt like such a big freedom.
Did you ever wonder while you were under Taliban rule? Like, I mean, you had to be. This was you were born in '96, so through 2001 at least. So you're about 5, 6 years old at the time. Did you ever wonder why you can't take a doll outside?
No, I don't,
It
because
just
we're
that's
born
the
in it,
rules.
and then it just feels like we would go to Pakistan, it was different, and then go back to, it felt like it's like the nat it, because you don't think too much, when you're young, you're that young, you don't think about those things. So I didn't like think, why could I do this? Why? Yeah, it
If
only.
Taliban came into your house and they saw that you guys had a doll, what would happen?
I mean, I think we know people like they would shave the person's head or something, and then they would like parade them in the house around the streets. If they like people who like defied them, like they would do things like that. Um,
All the way up until killing the person, or that
no,
was
not, I
rare?
don't think. No, I don't think killing was what they would do for things like that.
They're so
But they
nice.
would kind of shame, like make them like shame, like ashamed of themselves for
And
doing.
did you, growing up, do you remember any U.S. troops? Did you remember bombs being dropped, or were actual war happening around you, or was that more on the hillside in the mountains?
Yeah, so we left when the war really started. We left Afghanistan for a few months to Pakistan for safety, and then we returned. But then, like, initially there was, because we were living in the city, so there wasn't like this, like real, like those kind of fighting where like airstrikes and things happened. Like we were in the city, but later on, more like the fight did start on the streets of like shooting and like suicide bomb exploding and things like that.
Mm, that must have been so scary. Okay, so talk to me. So now things are lifted. U.S. got Taliban out of Kandahar. You're able to play with your dolls. You're able to go to school. Walk us through that part of your life.
Sure. Yeah. So I started going to school, and my mom herself being an educated, and she saw her older generation not going to school. So that was extremely like sad, and she was depressed about that. But then for this next generations of her kids, she was hopeful that they're going to get education. And we started going to school, and I hated going to school because Afghanistan went through civil war. It wasn't the school that my mom described to me, the one she went to. It was, Taliban, Afghanistan went through civil war and then the Taliban time. And so all the teachers they left Afghanistan. And so only people who were themselves either like educated till like eighth grade or like some 12th grade, but not fully educated. And then they would have like, because the salary was not that good. So some would even have like part-time jobs. And I didn't felt like this was like an intellectually thriving environment. And I was also really, really rebellious. And I couldn't like just be in this very, very strict environment. Mm. And also it was just extreme, like the punishments, like if you don't do your homework, they're gonna beat you. And I, being a rebellious person, I would like not do the homework because I didn't like someone telling me to do things. And it was just, yeah, it was, I never learned anything, and I was never excited about it. And the teacher themselves would it yeah, the teacher themselves was not interested in teaching us. So it was just yeah, as not
Did you know how to read already? Were you
yeah,
pretty
yeah.
educated when you?
My mom taught us like how to read even before we start going to school. And so like I would always like um being so proud, like, oh, I can, because some of the students did not know how to hold a pen. And
Oh
so
wow.
I were from educated family, so I knew how to hold a pen. I knew how to write. And I also like I knew some like my mom would like teach us ABC, or like, so I would always like comment like, oh, I'm like the top in English, because those are the small things. So yeah, those moments were there.
So
uh
what language did you guys speak at home? Is it Pashto or Farsi?
Pashto.
Pashto. Got it. All right. So moving forward, you didn't like school, and then what happened next?
Yeah, so the Taliban were ousted in 2001, but then they would become like grouped as an insurgency, and around 2005 and six they made a strong comeback. And now reading back history, I learned that they actually created this thing called education ministry, which really was about destructing education and like threatening schools, threatening families and teachers. For girls to not go to school. And so something like that happened to us too. Like a group of men came to our door and threatened us if we continued to go into school. And so we stopped going to school.
What
uh,
would happen? They said if you continue to go into school, what would
yeah.
happen to you?
Yeah, so at that time there was like girls being like the acid thrown on their face, or like a family like teachers getting killed, or like the schools. So those were the threats. But for us specifically, it was like acid thrown in our faces if we continued.
At 11 years old, you saw girls get acid thrown in their faces?
Yeah, I mean, I didn't like directly witnessed it, but on TV and like stories being told about that. And it's just like on the news that constantly there would be like, oh, girls get poisoned, schools girl like acid thrown their face, teachers being other killed, or so there was this like widespread campaign to deter girls from
Who's the
continuing.
famous girl from Afghanistan who got shot and
It was
survived?
yeah, it was Malala Yousafzai. She's from
Malala, yeah.
not from
Okay.
Afghanistan.
Amazing. I mean, I mean, I mean, you both have truly an amazing story, and I appreciate you coming out because, I mean, you being in public like this now, speaking out, going on YouTube. Do you have any idea? And we'll come back to your story, but do you have any idea how things are for girls in Afghanistan now after the U.S. withdrew?
Yeah, it's extremely dark. Girls can't go to school. They can't go to, like, can't they can't do anything. It just and I think it's like in 2021, like this really like a striking visual sign emerged on the street of Kabul. Like over the 20 years, women were celebrated, and there was murals of their face on the walls and things. And immediately, just overnight, their face were either defaced or painted black. And I think since then there have now been over, I don't know, 96 or something decrees just to restrict like every movement of a woman. And I think it just, they want the very presence of women in public to be erased. So that's what women are living under right now, women and
Why
girls.
is that?
I think I think we really have to go back to the time against the Soviets, the time, and this kind of extreme ideology was created to defeat the Soviets and the Soviet Union being in Afghanistan and communism, and really this is, uh, an evolution of that, and um, which is not like natural to Afghanistan, or even so. So I think that's how I see it. So because you have to create one extreme ideology to kill another one, and that's what results into.
You think communism was a ideology that created Islamic Jihad, or
No, I
help
think
me
it's the
understand what
other.
you're saying?
It's the other way because, like the communists came, and then there was so much, like the U.S. and its ally poured a lot of money into like supporting the guerrillas and the jihad, and even there are books that were actually created actually in the University of. Yeah, I forgot the name, but here in the U.S. they created those books actually, like ABC for kind of jihad. So it's really, I think a lot of us have like, it's not just Afghanistan. There's so much, outside world has so much responsibility in what's happening right now. And I really love this one quote. It says, "Deep crisis has long memories," and so I think the
Mm.
current crisis really has memories back in those Cold War policy. And
Oh, there's no doubt about that. All right, so, because you know what, even when we were in Afghanistan, a lot of the landmines that were still placed around there was from the late '80s and uh, well, I don't know if it was late '80s, but in the '80s with against the Russians, they were Russian
yeah,
mines. They were yeah, and a lot of our soldiers also lost limbs stepping in those old mines. You know,
yeah, yeah, that speaks to like how, yeah, it doesn't just come out of a vacuum or
totally agree. Okay, so walk me back. So now you can't go back to school. What's your life like? I mean, you're 11 years old. You didn't like school to begin with, according to you, and now they say you can't go to school. Were you like ecstatic about that? Were you happy, or what happened at that point?
I was initially, definitely I was happy. Like I was like, oh, I can just do whatever I want. But my mom was extremely sad, and she said, like, do you know how it feels for an educated mother to see her children grow up uneducated? And for me, and initially I would just watch TV and things like that. But then I was seeing my brothers; they were going to school, they were thriving academically, and they had this purpose in life. And I began to question my life of, like, what's the meaning of life? What's why I exist? And then those questions as to why even the world exists, like it just existence seemed so, why is this thing? And at that time also, like, there was the Taliban insurgency was growing and growing. There was a lot of suicide bombing exploding, and there was a lot of fighting going on. And yeah, I just felt like so many there's so many, felt very like my life so meaningless.
Who
And then
was fighting? Who was the fighting between?
yeah, so this was the fighting between the Afghan government and the Taliban. Uh,
Okay, got
yeah,
it.
yeah, and so yeah, so this is like I had all those questions, and so then I start learning English because my grandfather was self-taught, and he said this, like, if you know English, it's like opening a window to the world. And at that time my world felt really dark, and I wanted the light to come in through like learning. And in Afghanistan we also have like learning kind of like synonymous to light. And so that, like, it's so like I really wanted that. And also like there's some purpose that I have grip on my day it's because this was everyone, oh, guests are coming to this, or just like it's always like the rhythm, it danced to the rhythm of the outside world, and I wanted to have my own way of doing things. So yeah, I started learning English, and uh,
How did you start learning English when learning wasn't allowed?
so I start watching, because start like the journey of self teaching, and that, as I said, was inspired by my grandfather. And
But
so
what did you do? Did you like get online? Did you buy, so you had internet and you were able to go online and start learning?
no, initially not. I started watching TV because my grandfather was self-taught in a very extreme situation. He didn't even have a TV, so he just have like BBC English radio, and he had newspapers, and he had dictionary. So I just looked at him like, okay, he had those things and he was able to learn English. And I have the TV, and I definitely had more books than him. And I also had like he had to earn money for his family as well. And so he was poor, and my mom would tell me stories of how if he was walking on the street and he saw like a paper that was plain, and then he would like collect it even if it was in garbage, so he would then write on it. And so I think having that in, so like he was in that extreme situation, being able to teach himself, and not just teach himself, but he was an academic, and he was like writing novels, poetry, and like philosophy. So I was like, okay, I can, with my self teaching, I can go further than anyone. At least I was delusional. I was like just trying to like motivate myself with those things. So yeah, I start watching like BBC, CNN, Al Jazeera to
How
start.
were you able to? So I'm trying to understand, because before, 96 through 2001, you couldn't watch TV, you couldn't have any books, you couldn't have access to the outside world. At this point, was that different? Was this like the nicer Taliban that came back and said you can watch TV, or this was all hidden from them?
No, the Taliban were actually not in like government power. They were an insurgency, and they were like
Gotcha.
attacking things. They
Okay,
were like threatening. They were not like the government force. So the
that's right.
yeah, and so but all the things, my brothers had books, and he was trying to go outside to study. So he was learning English. So there were some materials that were that he was using, and from TV. So yeah, and I would watch for hours and hours CNN and BBC, and then I would understand just a word or two. But I just kept going, and then yeah, so that's how my learning journey, my English journey started.
CNN and BBC. Did you guys have Fox News there or no?
I don't remember having that.
Isn't that interesting that you only got one side? Huh. You came to America and you saw Fox News. Are you like, oh my God, this is just complete BS, all lies?
I don't watch any mainstream media.
Smart. Good job.
I only
You
try to read books and kind of like analyze it on my own.
you've been programmed enough. But yeah, I gotta tell you, I mean, both sides are extreme. I don't think personally any of them are telling us the exact truth. So the truth is somewhere in the middle there. But if you're only exposed to one side, like I was in Jamaica and for a speaking engagement, and all they have there is CNN. So it's like everybody's like, oh my God, how are you dealing with Trump? He's so terrible. And like they're only seeing this one side. And it was just interesting to see. Like, I think you have to be able to be exposed to multiple sides or
And then
nothing at
I
all.
was just focused on the English. What
Oh,
is
you're just
your
focusing
thing?
on English. Okay, good for
I'm not
you.
interested in politics.
Well, your English is really, really good. So kudos to you. How long have you been in the States?
Seven, almost. I think it's 8 years. It's gonna be
That's
eight
very
years
cool.
soon. Mhm.
So I was born in Azerbaijan, and
Oh,
I moved to the States when I was 10 years old.
mhm.
And English is a second language for me as well. So that
Oh.
kudos to you. It's really. Did your family move with you?
No, I was alone.
Seven. So you were what, 20, 21 years old when you
I was
moved
20
to.
years, 20 years old.
At 20 years old, here's a girl coming out of Afghanistan and moves to the United States. Okay, I got to understand. How did that happen?
Yeah, so there's a long, it happened like a long, it was a long journey full of problems and every step of the way. So yeah, so I was start learning English, and then again, as I said, I was watching news, and so there was a lot of wars, and there was wars outside, and I just like my mind space was surrounded by war, and I want something different. And my brothers was going to Pakistan. I was 16 years old at the time, and I asked him, just bring me anything that's in English and that's not about war. And he brought me Time magazine. One of the things that he brought me was Time magazine. And as I was flipping through the page, it was about the 100 influencer people of the world. And I come across Sal Khan, Khan Academy. And it's a learning platform, and it said like learn anything anywhere for free. And I immediately opened up my laptop that my sister sent, and I looked at Khan Academy, and I saw this advertisement for the beauty of algebra. And I remember hearing conversation from my brothers and male cousins and how they would talk about algebra being so hard, like it's the one equation, just one line equation, but it has pages of proofs, and then at the end you just get like one answer, like just like this tiny answer. And I was so intrigued by it, like how can that be? It's just something mysterious and hidden. And so when I saw that, I was like, oh, it's too hard for me because I don't even know. Like, it's just something, this, I just know it as this, the way my brothers and cousins described. And so I was disappointed that it's too hard for me, like, not be able to learn from Khan Academy. And then I turned off my laptop and I went back. And for after a few days, I will okay, let me check and see if there's still something for me. And I remember that the only thing I learned really in school was addition and subtraction. And so I went back to my brother. I was like, "What comes after addition and subtraction?" And he told me fractions. And I went there and I on Khan Academy I searched fractions, and there it was. And I started learning, and I also went back to study my addition and subtraction, but the right way. So yeah, I was just really obsessed with it, and I love that way of thinking about, you kind of have to build something, and then build based on that you build another thing. It was just entering a different space of mind because it wasn't about war, and this was just this abstract and clean way of thinking. And yeah, I was just and then from like in 3 years, like from not knowing how to add and subtract, I went to like college level calculus and physics, and I was really interested in physics because of my questions about life and the meaning of existence, which I was also which led me to study more philosophy. And like philosophy being, if you go really back to ancient Greeks, they really, the physics and philosophy is kind of like one subject, and they ask those questions about the same way. And so really, yeah, and that went on, so that I was like, okay, I want to study more physics. I want to understand how the world works, the natural world works, and then for that, to know that, I have to understand more math. And so it was always like, okay, I want to do this, and then I have to do that. And so like for 3 years, that's yeah, so that was.
How
And
old were you when this was going on?
yeah, so I started learning science in 2012, and I was 16, and then until like I was 19 or something. But even when I came here, I was still learning. So this was yeah, at that time.
So even though you couldn't go to school physically, you found Khan Academy and you were homeschooled via the internet.
Yeah,
And it was awesome because this time you were really craving the information. You really wanted to learn it. And so this was really exciting for you. Way
yeah.
to go.
Yeah, so that's how it was. And then I also but then I began to feel like I can't just be in my room and just like learn from the internet. Like I wanted to be able to because I was reading those self-taught researchers like Michael Faraday and all of this people, and that they were really, they have to be in an institute to be able to do this something more. And of course, each time you achieve one goal, you have like 100 more goals that comes. And so there was so much that I wanted to do. um,
Sola, let me just back up a little bit. You mentioned earlier in our episode, you said, I started wondering, what's the meaning of life? What's my purpose here? What answer did you get to that?
well, I'm still finding it out.
What do you
It's
think it
not a
is?
fixed answer. Sorry.
What do you think it is?
I think I don't
For
think.
you personally, I'm sure it's different for all of us, right?
Yeah. Yeah. So for me, I initially thought like the meaning of life is going to be like this mountain top, and you reach there and then you suddenly see it, and then like, okay, here it is. But I think it's more like a horizon, like you kind of see it, but each time you close to it, like it just it moves back. You feel like you can reach it. But I think for me, it really is about learning and new way of thinking. And I have been really discovering of, like, the hierarchy of, like, trying to get to the higher truths of life. And uh, that's like, every day I feel like when I'm unhappy, I go back to learn something new, and that makes me happy. And I think just like finding connections between different ideas, or like it's all like, I feel like more like intellectual work for me. Really, that's what it
Why
is.
did you write your book?
I wrote my book because I really wanted, I lived in Afghanistan, and of course there was war, but there was so much beauty, there was so much joy in life. And living there, you don't notice it because that's your life. And moving to the US, and I came to the US, and I saw how news was differently portraying Afghanistan. It was just about, the bomb exploding and the smoke rising in the sky, and and then that many casualties. That was the story of Afghanistan, and that's what people saw. And if so, just me being, we have very dark humor. Like, Afghans have very dark humor, and I would talk to someone and I would make a joke, and they would just like, "How can you make such a joke?" So there was so much of life that was not seen. And I think when you see people only in extreme situations, you don't have empathy for that. And so for me, it really was to, and also I was started reading a lot of novels, and I saw, especially Russian novels, I saw so much of a complexity of Afghan life in that, reflected in those novels. And I was like, why the Afghan story is not written that way? And so really it was because seeing Afghanistan from Western perspective first, and then also reading those things, and then that made me to reflect and tell my story such that it can show like Afghanistan in a whole way, not just like a very like one angle of things.
Gotcha. Okay. Awesome. Very cool. So how did you end up in the States?
Yeah, so as I said, I was learning at home, but I wanted to study outside, and I I did not. So first of all, I didn't have a high school degree because I was self-teaching, and I went to one of the education ministry in Kandahar, and they immediately declined that it's not going to be fair for other students who going to school and suddenly you come here and say, oh, one day you want to be a high school graduate. So that door was immediately shut for me. And so because I wanted to go to apply to universities and study abroad. And then I looked for online, and I found out about GED, which is exam here in the US. And I didn't have books to prepare for it. And so I asked my sister, and she sent me the GED preparation books. And I spent a few months with that, and then only to
Where
see.
is your sister? Was she already in the States?
She was in England.
She was in England. Okay.
Yeah. And so I had those books, but then when I started to register for the exam, it was not available in Afghanistan or in Pakistan, and so I was disappointed. But I still wanted to. I think when there's all around the situation, there's so many obstacles and hopelessness. You find hope, even if it's a little delusional. And I started. Then my brother took the IELTS exam, and so I was like, okay, I'm just going to focus on that exam and see what happens. And so while I was focusing on that exam, I wanted to my written English. So I was reading and I was writing in English, but I did not know how was my spoken English, and I had to prepare, focus on that as well for the exam. And so I this website called conversationexchange.com, and I came across that, and I got connected to this American students in the US, and she wanted to learn my language Pashto, and I wanted to learn English, so it's like you exchange language. And so when I was talking to her, I told, and initially she was like, again, I think like just the Afghan perception, like the way people see Afghanistan, and then she would start talking to me, and she was just like, how are you, why do you do those things, and things like that. And then she was, and then I was reading at that time a book about the world, like about the universe and how it came to in existence. And so she was like, oh, let me see if I can connect you to this author. And so she just like sent this random email to this author, and then I like, oh, there's this Afghan student who, or like, reading your book, she's self-taught and wants to talk to you. And so meanwhile, she also, her name is Emily, she said, oh, you should come to the US, like you should take the SAT, that will allow you to enroll to university. So I start preparing for that exam, as I was also like talking now to this professor about black holes, how universe came to existence and all of that. But of course, the SAT was also not available in Afghanistan, but it was available in Pakistan. So I went. It was a long journey and problems along the way. So I went to Pakistan. Initially, there was no testing spot available. I had to wait for some time, and then I took the SAT and I scored high enough. I came back, and the next step was, and then I got accepted to universities, and the next step was to get a visa to come to the US. And I applied for the appointment, and I went with my mother to Kabul, to the US embassy there. And just in 1 minute, my visa was declined. My student visa was declined, and I felt like I fell into an abyss, because everything that was in my hand, I was able to do. Even, there's so many obstacles, but just here in 1 minute, this person just declined my visa, and I was asking why. Why you're doing this? And he said, I don't think you're going there to study. I think you're just going there to immigrate. And I think this was the first time in my life that I realized how the world sees Afghans, and how, like, they just see not as an intellectually curious people or some, they just want to say, oh, we just want to immigrate, and that's it. So I think that also, like, of course there, and I was, of course I couldn't do anything, but my friend Emily, she was furious, because she herself also saw this narrative of, okay, the US is there to help women and all of that, and suddenly she saw, like, this person should get visa, and not, and so she was like, I will not. So it's just that professor that was talking to Emily, they all come together, and so just, and so I was also, and then they were able to contact, like, person from the New York Times, and so that all come together, and then I was able to get not a student visa but a humanitarian parole visa, and that's how I was able to come to the US.
That's awesome. Let me ask you something. I typically ask this before we get on podcasts with my guest, but I didn't ask you this question. What's your goal for being on podcast?
So wait, is it a record? You're gonna cut this part? Yeah.
I'm not
Okay.
going to cut this part. No, this is yeah. Like, why do you go on podcast?
To promote the book.
To promote the book. Got it. Perfect.
Wait.
I love it. That's great. Okay. So tell us about the book. What's the best? Why should somebody? Who's the book written for? By the way.
I think the book is really written for the world, to read about Afghan stories. And as I said, there is really very few stories, and even if there are written just about one aspect of Afghan life. And I think it really, and it also, or most of them are also one focus on one period of Afghanistan. And really, this, I've made this really conscious decision to go really back into my grandfather's stories, and how Afghanistan was modernizing, and how it was different about in my mom's time, and how then it, like, slowly it fell into this darkness, and it just momentarily it kind of got out, and then it fell back. And so it really, for me, was to have that count of life that was different.
Awesome. Sola, I really, really appreciate you being here. Is there anything that I didn't ask you that you wish I would have?
No.
You're amazing. Hey, listen, I wish you the best of luck. You're such a great example for the youth, for showing what's possible when you put your mind to it, going against all odds. I mean, they said no to you. That didn't stop you. You ended up in the US. Your dream is fulfilled. Now you are a quantum information researcher of all things. That sounds like you got to be pretty educated for that. And I really appreciate you coming on to share your story. Hey guys, listen, if you're not in our Facebook community yet, Relentless Goal Achievers community on Facebook, get over there. Let's talk. Let's strategize. Let's get you hitting your goals, because when we hit our goals, this world is a better place. I'll see you guys in the next episode.